Hey everybody, Wandering Kid here. Welcome to another KSP video. What I have here is a science bomb. This one in particular is built for Mun and Minmus. The idea being that we'll go with all of our science experiments, go pick up everything we can out of a biome, and come home with the process. It's a relatively simple rocket. We come up here, we've got a fairing which goes into a spark hiding under a T400. We have our experiments there. We're going to detach our probe core and friends up here, and particularly the experiment storage unit. And by bringing all of our experiment data into there, we'll be able to return home with what we need. Got an inline reaction wheel, a parachute, which I've tweaked to 0.2 pressure. This craft comes in without needing any particular upgrades. 30 parts, just under 18 tons, exactly 20 meters with the fairing. The only thing is if you don't upgrade your tracking station, one of the things you may need to be aware of is that you're running a Communicatron 16S if you use my craft file. It can be swapped out for an MG5 if you need the extra distance. This just makes things easier on the 16S. Now, let me show you how to fly this puppy. To the launch pad. So, obviously, first thing we do is we stick on SAS, bring this up to full throttle at first. Our little T-30 here only has 1.17 TWR on liftoff. Now, taking off with this can get a little hairy, so be aware of that. You're going to just basically try and get it in a 90-ish direction. Once we get up to about 45, we'll start our tip. We're going to get a little aggressive with it. We're going to get it down to 80, like right out of the gate here. Get myself rotated a bit, and now we're going to hang on. One of the objectives we're going to have during this gravity turn is we're not going to do the usual style, where you're trying to get down to about 10 degrees at 25K or so. We're going to run this a little high, and the reason for that is we really want to get height. In the middle of this launch, we're going to go dead. And we're just going to ride the fairing up into upper atmosphere so that our spark has less resistance when we're going. This particular craft is very draggy, and we don't want to drop the fairings until we're up into very thin atmosphere. And I'm going to try and correct this a little bit, just try and drag things over a hair. Now you'll notice I'm already pitched down to 45. That's, I don't really want to drop any further because I really want to climb. So at this point I've already kind of screwed up the grav turn, but it is recoverable. But we're going to end up sitting at 40 degrees for a while. So we're approaching 15K, and now I'm going to start just slowly nosing over. Nowhere near as aggressive as my usual gravity turns that I would be doing by now. Usually by now I'm at about 30 to 25 degrees. And the entire objective is to get this apoapsis up into at least 55K, preferably 60. Without wasting our sideways delta V. But as we're coming up through 22, now I'm going to start pushing it over a bit more. I'm going to start getting a little more aggressive with it, getting it down to like 20. I've got about 19 seconds of fuel left here. And as you can see, it gets really wobbly if you get too aggressive with it. Your big objective here, okay, 20, is to make sure this goes above 50K. Otherwise, this will not launch with the delta V you really want it to have. Getting it up at around 60K, I'm going to nose over, try and blow our last delta V off the T-30 sideways. Okay, now we're going to aim into the prograde, let the fairings do its work. And you'll notice I ended up with an APO of 73K. That's fine. I've got about 1550 horizontal speed. That'll probably drop to 1540 or so. Just stay behind your fairings for now. You don't want to pop fairings until you're over 55K. If you end up with a more shallow ascent, you can go to a pop them at between 45 to 50 if you absolutely have to. My first rule of thumb is don't do anything until the heat stops. My next rule of thumb is obviously pop them as late as possible so that you lose as little amount of delta V as possible. The shape of my orbit right now looks like this. We've spent our 3,000 off of the T-30 launch. And if you'll notice, we're only barely dripping off some apoapsis height here now. If I pop the fairings early, you'd notice a significant drag drain occurring on this. If I had an extra part, at this point I would have dropped off this section with the tails and just turned this into a orbital bullet. Okay, we're up above 60. We can get rid of this thing. And let's drop off our rear end. Start gaining some sideways. Just push our apoapsis up slightly. Now you can do this burn in upper atmo if you don't have a space-worthy apoapsis, but I'm good with 74-160. We'll add a maneuver in. $78, $70. I'm just playing with it, trying to get it semi-even. There we go. That'll work out. So it's going to be about a 44-second burn to put myself into orbit with this. And this is just catching up all of the delta V we didn't pick up on the horizontal portion of the burn because we wanted to hide behind the fairing for a while. So we've gone orbital. We have 1943 delta V left. As long as you've got 1900 or better, you can pull this off. It will depend on your accuracy and your ability to burn. I have gotten up here with over 2000 delta V before. It really depends on my launch profile and how exact I get it. Using MechJeb, I'm sure you can nail down exactly where it needs to be. So our next step is to add a maneuver, head out to Moon. Start with, there we go. Usually start with 855 and figure it out from there. Okay, so at this point I'm just going to get it close, and then we'll figure it out from there. Typical Moon insertion burn cost $855, roughly, between $855 and $860. So I finished my intercept burn. Looks like I'm coming in at a periapsis of 53K. That's not where I want it, but we're going to take a look at Moon first. So if we notice, I'm actually coming in on a polar injection, which actually isn't horrible. So I could come down here and go for the southern polar area. Now, something to keep in mind, the more unequatorial you are, the more delta V it's going to cost to go home. So it's just something to keep in mind. Now, one of the things I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to put a maneuver node out here. And if you can't do maneuver nodes yet because you haven't upgraded your tracking station, this becomes much more difficult. Just saying. I do recommend picking up the conics and the extra range on your comm satellites if you want to start playing with Mun and Minmus with Oktos. So with that in mind, I could try and come in on an equatorial orbit, let's say over here or something like that. But, you know, coming in on the South Pole actually sounds like a good idea. Something to keep in mind when you're looking at the Moon is that you typically, if you're coming in across here on the equatorial line, you'll be trying to aim for somewhere in this general range. I kind of missed, but that's okay. If you do that, though, the items that are over here, roughly 1/3 away, are the ones that will be over here near the retrograde line on Moon so that you have some ideas on where you want to aim for braking. But since I'm going to go for the South Pole on this one, because that's a difficult run and seems like it should be interesting. Okay, let's see how much closer it can bring us. Because I want to come in tight. And the more delta V I spend out here, or sorry, making adjustments out here is a lot less expensive than making delta V adjustments closer in. So 7.5, I want to be above 9K if I'm doing a polar. I can do an 8.5. When you're highlighting, 9.9, that'll work. So we'll take care of that adjustment here soon. And that will bring us into a nice tight orbit, and once I get myself injected on polar, we can start looking at a landing trajectory. So I finished my burn. I have a 9.6 kilometer periapsis. So we'll add a maneuver here, and your typical Moon injection will run you about 250. Between 250 to 300, depending. I got to be careful of that periapsis, so we're going to... Oh, that's the wrong direction. Play with the radial a bit to make sure that I don't come crashing down. 9, 5, 10. Yeah, that's acceptable. So my injection burn will be 274.9 meters per second. Now at this point, I have just over 1,000 delta V left. I'm going to be spending 1/3 of that on my injection. To land, it's 550 meters per second roughly to counter your orbital speed. And then from there, you'll have enough for landing. So you're looking at, you have about 300 to 350 delta V for your actual landing when you do, go for these attempts. So there we go. Actual apoapsis 10.3, actual periapsis 9.4. So now I'm looking at doing a landing on the South Pole here. So I can land on either pole. On Moon, you've got poles, polar lowlands. You've got the polar crater, which is particular. That would be this particular crater here. You've got basins and stuff like that, but I'm just going to go for a polar landing. I don't typically want to use these science bombers for high precision landings. I just want to go for a general biome. I have dropped it into the southwest crater, which is very deep and it's very expensive to get out of, but that's okay. So here's our science bomb. So since I want to land on the pole, I'm going to go from the other pole, add a maneuver. I'm going to drop our periapsis to just around 5K. I'm going to move this to be where I want it to be. Now I'm going to eyeball it and just make sure that that doesn't crash into anything. That looks a little tight down there. Yeah, I don't like that. I'm going to raise that up a hair. Go for 5.7. Yeah, that looks a little safer. Okay, so we will aim for that. That'll cost me 3 meters per second, which will bring me right down to 800. If you'll notice, my surface speed is 556.3 meters per second. We're going to have to cancel that to be able to land. So we'll take care of this maneuver node, and then we'll set up for landing. One thing you'll want to note is that the North Pole is very, very nasty terrain. As you can see below me, don't come in too tight on the North Pole. You'll definitely want to stay above 8 to 8.5K while crossing this terrain. It's a very nasty area and very difficult to land in. So I missed my maneuver node. I forgot to adjust. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a slight burn down here. And I'll move my periapsis over here down a little lower than I normally would cruise. Let's say down a 4.4. Oops, no, that's a little too low. If you take a look, I'm actually running into Moon here. So let's bring that up a hair. I want to make sure I stay above planet. All right, that'll work. And now down here, I happen to know that I'm running at 553 meters per second, so I'll start there on my brake. Now, the reason I'm doing this isn't for precision. I'm not trying to do a precision landing with this. What I'm trying to do is just make sure that I know when I need to start burning, and I can add in a maneuver node and things like that. And I have my estimated burns, node burn times, things of that nature. So at least I've got a rough guess. So let's head down that way. So we're approaching our South Pole in our maneuver node here. I'm a minute 32 out. It's going to take me about 48 seconds worth of burn to slow this craft down to landing speed. So we'll just zoom in a little bit. Now this terrain setup will clear itself up here shortly. Okay, so I'm at 24 seconds from the node. Let's start the burn. I'll roll myself this way so it's easier for me to control. Now, if we can, we want to avoid these ditches. The deeper we end up, the more annoying it becomes. That mountain might be problematic. I am coming in pretty dang low. For the pole, anyway. Okay, looks like we should be all right. Okay, at this point I don't care about the maneuver node. I've started my burn where I wanted to start my burn. At this point I only care about surface prograde and how fast I'm coming in at the surface. Now this craft is overthrusted, so at some point you're going to go down to a very minor drip. I'm going to get myself lined up with my retrograde on the top of the ball. Now, the most efficient way to do this is what's called suicide burning, which is where you kick in max just in time to not crash. I'm going to get close to that. But not entirely. So at this point, I'm going to get myself down to around 3 to 5 meters per second, and I'm just going to adjust it slightly so that I'm constantly falling at about... Whoop, whoop. Don't want to... There we go. No. Stay up. We want this upright. Okay, not the picture-perfect landing I was hoping for, but functional. Okay, so let's open this up. Let's get our experiments going. Now we come up here, we right-click the experiment storage unit, collect all. Notice we got temp, atmo, mystery goo, and material study all loaded up. I've got 173 meters per second left over in this bottom part that we're going to use on takeoff. And then we're going to switch over to our return capsule. Now, since I happen to land on the pole, I really want to take off either north or south so that I get the closest to orbital, and then I can come back in over the top. So I'm going to spin this on the ground so that it makes my life easier. There we go. And let's go. So I'm going to go north. Yeah, okay, this way. Now you don't need much up. If you'll notice, I've already got an apoapsis height of 8627, which I kind of need though. Now I'm just going to go horizontal with it. Get as much out of this as I can. And then dump off our experiments. Deal with that in a minute. Now our purpose here is to get as much sideways speed as we can so that we can get ourselves back in orbit. And not hit anything while we're at it. Now you'll notice I have just over 1,000 delta V in this. That's just enough to get to orbit. 550, 560, 3 to 350 to get yourself back to Kerbin. Usually takes about 330 for your ejection orbit to give you a aerobraking path to Kerbin. And we're not going to be overly selective about where we're landing on Kerbin either. Now, unfortunately, this thruster weight, while it's 2.0, you do typically need to aim yourself up a little bit to avoid getting dropping your apoapsis. And I got a little aggressive with that, so we're going to bring ourselves up to about 25 degrees, start getting ourselves some vertical speed again. You can always check your vertical speed up here, too, if you don't have Kerr. But my main objective is to make sure my apoapsis is always in front of me, and that it's always high enough to not hit anything, which is at least 8.5. Now this burn does take a while. This is not a quick burn. That's an ant sitting on the back of that for saving some weight on the trip up. So that's something to keep in mind. This is a you're coming home eventually type of setup. So what I'm doing here is I'm adjusting my pitch, try and keep my apoapsis, since I'm at enough height now, 3 to 4 seconds ahead of me. When it starts running away from me, I pitch down a hair. When it starts coming back to me, I pitch up some. And then we will proceed to do this for a little while. Okay, you'll notice I've gone orbital. If I scroll out, my apoapsis is up here at 10.3. My periapsis is down here at 8,000. Not really what I want, but until I get to my apoapsis, don't want to try and correct it. So I'm just going to nudge it up a little bit up here. There we go, little 1.5 meter per second adjustment once we get to apoapsis. And then from there, we're going to set up a return trip to Kerbin. So I went back and relaunched because I completely forgot the economical way to return from a polar orbit, which I'll show you here in a moment. What you don't want to do is once you've taken off, just start burning for Kerbin no matter what you're doing. What you want to do is you'll notice I have the orbital line here for my probe. I want it to line up on the prograde retrograde for Moon. So if you're sitting around waiting just for the science bomb and you've got nothing else to do at the moment, you can go over and highlight it. And because it's at such a low orbit, if you actually fly the science bomb, you won't be able to get higher than 10K. But here inside of the tracking station, I can speed things along to significantly faster speeds. And as you can tell, I missed my window. I screwed up. What ended up happening was I put my timer way too far forward. I guess it should have been about a day and a half. But so be it. I'm going to see if I can get it home while I'm kind of still on prograde area. So if we take a look at it, our objective is to shoot out the back of Moon. My orbit looks like this at the moment. So somewhere around here, we'll add a maneuver, and we'll see how this looks for a second. We'll give it up to 200 or so. All right. Now, if we bring it up to roughly 330, it usually gets us home. So we'll go with 287 here. Okay, I hate when it does that. Okay, that gets me to 78, 55, 46. Now, when you're bringing this in, don't bring it in under 42.5 on your first pass. It's going to take 2 passes to bring this in. And what ends up happening is you have to watch overheat on the Okto because it's not perfectly protected by the 1.25, by the very small thermocoupler. So anywhere around 43, 42.5, somewhere in that area, 42.3, I'll take that. So we'll be able to get this home. It'll cost me 291 delta V to break orbit with Moon and get myself a landing or a aerobrake trajectory with Kerbin. So we're approaching Kerbin. We're at 105,000 at the moment, and our first priority is to get ourselves aimed retrograde. And that's going to be a big deal for the rest of this trip. Now, there's no reason to come in any faster than we absolutely have to. Might as well burn off the rest of our propellant. Anything we got, spend it now. The only thing you want to be careful of is whether or not you're lowering your periapsis. So if you need to, aim a little high with that, and make sure your periapsis isn't falling below a safety margin that you need. And everything we can burn off here helps us in the long run. We're about to enter atmosphere. I'm at 72K. I came back with a lot of delta V this time. It really depends on how low on Moon you land. It will depend a lot on how much delta V you have by the time you're actually coming back into Kerbin's SOI and what you've got for landing and things like that. At this point, my objective is literally just burning off all this fuel. Everything we can get rid of speed-wise can only help. And then what we'll be doing is we'll be blowing this off and activating our parachute at the same time. And the reason I want to activate our parachute early is in case we don't have comm connection when we're during the last portion of the landing phase. I want to make sure that we have the parachute ready to deploy. Okay, so that's the end of that. Let's get rid of them. We'll kick them off. Now we have to hide in our prograde, and we have to do it pretty emphatically. Let me make sure my real authority is where I want it. Now the Okto gets hot pretty quick, so be aware of that. If it's sticking out in any direction, it can get very, very hot. Now, one of the things I realized I had to do when I first built this ship was I had put the Okto higher on here, and if it touched any of the heat stream, it got into a lot of trouble. So I put it directly behind the heat shield to give it the best chance at hiding in the cone. Now you'll notice our periapsis is falling down to 41.9. And we're just going to sit here and soak up some lovely atmosphere, slow ourselves down a bit. And you'll notice every time I'm starting to see any kind of heat bar, I'm pushing myself around a little bit to make sure, oh, no. Pushing myself around a little bit to stay in the prograde. This is the most dangerous part of the science bomb missions, is not losing the science probe during re-entry. And if you come in any lower, if you try and get into the deep atmo on your first pass, you'll usually pop your Okto immediately. Now, I might actually end up on a landing trajectory here. I'm not sure. We're bleeding off a lot of speed, and I brought back a lot of Delta V from Moon. 300 extra Delta V for this ship is actually considered a lot. And we are dumping speed like mad. Yep, I think we're actually landing on this particular trajectory. As long as I can just keep it safe. Now, once you get down to non-lunar entry speeds and simply orbit entry speeds, it's not quite as picky. So once you're under like 2300, 2200, you're not in as great a risk of blowing parts off your ship as you are during the lunar re-entry phase. Yep, there we go. Okay, we are definitely landing this turn. Our periapsis is about to bottom out. Our apoapsis is at 41K, so we're definitely coming in. We're coming in somewhere. It's still wise to keep yourself hidden behind your prograde. Or, rephrase that. It's still wise to keep yourself hidden behind your heat shield aimed retrograde, because there's no reason to damage parts and lose components at this point if you don't have to. Now, I do happen to have this on hard mode, which doesn't typically affect thermal, but if you're on one of the easier modes, you may have shut it off completely, so this may be a moot point for you, as to having to stay behind the heat shield and keep yourself safe. Now, as you'll notice, we're just kind of gliding at 40K. It's still dumping some of our speed, but we're not really dropping yet. That will happen soon. But isn't it pretty? So we finally slowed down enough that we're no longer on fire. We'll be coming in over on the islands southwest of the crater. So yeah, this is probably roughly one of the worst places for recovering this pod from a price perspective. We don't need the ablative the heat shield anymore. We can jettison it, but I recommend you get undershoot before you do, because otherwise it kind of flips up and over you, and it might smack something. So once you're under full shoot, drop it, so that you have less weight during the landing phase of the parachute. Now remember, one of the things I did do was I adjusted min pressure to 0.2 instead of the typical 0.1. And I'll show you what it looks like if we shut off SAS. It wants to flip over and typically nose first with that parachute. If you don't leave SAS on during your landing phase, it'll pop. It'll flip you. Not necessarily a bad thing. So our parachute's out at about 9K. And now we just have to wait for us to pop it at about 1,000 meters. Nice soft landing. So let's recover the vessel. There we go. So temp scan, pressure scan, mystery goo, mat steady. The recovery of the vessel doesn't matter because I've returned a couple of vessels from Moon at this point. So we got 132 science from the science bomb. It cost us 1,650 in roots, minus whatever we recovered for parts. In this case, I got 25.6%. So, yeah, it basically cost me 16 grand. But that's not bad for that amount of science, 132. So there you have it, folks. A science bomb from Moon that you can launch with very minimal upgrades. The only upgrade I recommend you absolutely have for this is the one for your tracking station to bring it up to patch conics and very heavy DSN power so that you can communicate with your pod out in the middle of nowhere. The rest of them are not necessary. So, I hope you enjoyed. If you liked it, please leave a like or a comment. They're always appreciated, and I'll see you for the next one.